Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week I wanted to offer a suggestion, because we are coming upon the spooky season, and that means a lot of folks are going to be coming back to the world and Chronicles of Darkness, and a lot of us are going to be trying to make new pitches to our friends and maybe some of our family to try and see if we can drag them a little deeper into this setting. But sometimes it can be hard, especially when it feels like the world all around us is going crazy and everything is just harsh. How do you sell a game like this? How do you get people to find the fun, the escapism, in a dark and dreary setting, when dark and dreary describes a lot of our lives right now? Well, my suggestion is that we do what people have always done when times get tough and things are hard. You reach for a little bit of escapism and wonder what things would have been like in the past. Because the World of Darkness, in addition to being a global game, is a game that has roots back to the dawn of human history if you follow all of the lore books. So you could theoretically run any of the Chronicles of Darkness or the World of Darkness games in any other time period that you want, as long as you're willing to do the research. And this isn't new to most of us out there. We've seen the Dark Ages books for Vampire in the Old World. We've come across, the Werewolf the Apocalypse books for the Wild West. But mostly the company just hit major time periods that would get folks interested. And there's so much more that was never even touched on that we could have so much fun with. And once you start coming up with ideas, they just keep spiraling. For example, what about playing a mage or a Changeling the Lost game during the 60s and 70s? You have the psychedelic era, you have changes in music, changes in culture, you have inventions of new drugs that open the mind and let you see things you shouldn't see. That is prime real estate for those games, and what would it be like to have your awakening while you're at a major music festival? What would it be like to be stolen away from the mists of Vietnam and then to come back to a world that you don't remember anymore? Or go back even further. What about a hunter game during the 50s where everything is shadowy government agencies and creatures are starting to hide in suburbia right behind the white picket fences, right where anyone could see them? Go back a little bit further to one that I'm sure all of us have thought about or enjoyed a little bit. What were the supernatural communities up to during the World Wars? And if World War II feels a little too overdone for you, or it's a little too dark in some places, what were your werewolves doing during the Great War? How did that affect your community? Did you volunteer for the military? Were you doing secret operations? Were you using the cover of war to try and gain footholds in your own battles? Did the war actually impinge on your territory, so now you're fighting all fronts to keep people out of sacred spaces so that they don't corrupt them? You can go game by game by game and find something a little different and a little unique for each of them. Whether you want to do a Geist game set during Prohibition, whether you want to reach all the way down and grab Mummy and set that during the European expansion and the curiosity into Egypt and all of its history, what is that going to do? If you want to get really weird, you could even set a Promethean game. Though, you might not be able to play the Wretched depending on how far back you go, but that's neither here nor there. And that is something that I think a lot of us don't really consider, because too often we think that if it's not in a published book, if no one's written a supplement for it, then it's not an option. Or we tend to think, well, it would be so much work. And part of that is true. Historical accuracy is going to be a thing you have to deal with when it comes to running games in the past. But, asterisk on that, there are so many things going on in our history and our cultures that it can be deeply exciting to your players to just try something new, go somewhere that feels as exotic as any fantasy RPG, but is our real history. You know, whether you want to have something set in France during the hunt for the Beast of Gévaudan, whether you want to have something going on during the Russian Revolution, whether you want to go even further back to, you know, the times where, you know, the dragon-headed longships were, you know, prowling the waters of Europe and stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. There are so many time periods you could go to. And the whole of these games takes on a very different look when you go to different eras. And if you're planning on doing this, and I say this because this is something I am currently doing, I mentioned Prohibition for a reason, make sure you sit down, do your research, and make sure this is something you won't feel overwhelmed by, and that it's something your players are going to enjoy. Because too often we might get hyperfixated on a time period, or we might find something really neat, but at the end of the day, that isn't going to be what really drives our players and what really gets their attention. So, if you want to follow this solution, which I highly recommend everyone do, make sure you get real friendly with Wikipedia, and that you check and see what about your knowledge is true and what about your knowledge is pop culture or just something that you filed away and never really thought about or questioned that might not be true. Other points to keep in mind. Time period is one part of this. Another part of it is going to be location in the world. As I mentioned in a previous video, the World of Darkness, the Chronicles of Darkness, these are global settings and global games. And time gets funny when you start asking what was going on in certain time periods around the world. Because a Wild West game, we tend to think of what's going on out in the American West, what's going on in Texas, California, Oklahoma, etc., etc. But you could take a game during that exact same time period and set it out east. And now you have the question of, well, what's going on in New York? What's going on in Boston? What's going on in Chicago if you want to go to the Midwest during that same time period? And we tend to forget there are so many events that happen at the same time. It can give you a bit of a mind blow, if I'm honest. Because the Wild West period out in America is also kind of the Victorian period out in England. So you can have characters, plot lines, etc. that are overlapping without realizing the only difference is they're thousands of miles away from each other. So, not only do you need to understand the history of the era you're running in, but you need to understand what the confluence of events are and what's going on where. Because oftentimes that is going to give you fresh perspective, and that is going to be something very important to keep in mind. It's also going to open things up to your players, because as we have seen, people always travel, whether it's fairly recently by air, by sea, or further back in time by horse or by foot. People will go wherever they want, and part of the fun for players may be bringing an English dandy out to the Wild West. Why? Who knows? You know, part of it might be bringing someone down to Mexico City from the other end of the world. Why are they here? That's for you to consider. But those physical distances, those cultural differences, can be very interesting when you take into account time period and what's happening. So, take a step back, take a big picture view of things whenever you can if you plan on following this strategy, because it is often going to provide you interesting situations, and it might act as a bit of a history lesson for folks who are interested. Lastly, and this is a thing that I've had to learn the hard way, and that sometimes is just a thing you have to keep in mind, do not sweat the small stuff. Sure, language was different, slang was different, particular cultural things might be different, but no one is expecting this to be a full documentary. Only go as deep into the facts as you care about and as your players care about. Because if no one at the table is really interested in certain terminology, if they are okay being a little fuzzy on the exact years that certain events happened, that's not going to be too big of a problem, especially the further back you go in history, because we don't always know exactly when certain events happened. So if it's something that's integral to a character, something that's really important, like, no, you can't have a Thompson submachine gun in, 1908. They haven't been out yet. That's just not a weapon that's available. Or if it's something like a character claims that they survived the Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, if you're set before that event happened, then that's going to be very confusing to anyone who's wondering why there's a time traveler in their midst. But aside from those things, only be as detail-oriented as you need to be and as your table needs you to be. Because otherwise you might end up driving yourself mad for no particular reason. But if this is something you've thought about following, down in the comments below, I want you to tell me what era you wanted to run in and what game you wanted to run it for. Because I want to see whether or not this is an idea that's been bubbling in a lot of other potential storytellers' minds, and if so, what really grabbed you? What did you want to do most? And if you're a player, comment on those. Let people know, hey, this sounds like a really cool idea. Maybe we'll never get to play at the same table, but it's a good idea to sit down, talk to each other, and share some ideas. I know we have more viewers on these videos than I think, so let's see what ideas we can come up with together. And as always, if you have any other topics you'd like to see me cover about either the world or Chronicles of Darkness, if you have any particular topics that you really think deserve a whole episode dedicated to them, please leave that down in the comments below as well. I read them, my publisher reads them. This is one of the ways that we decide what we're going to do for future episodes, so make your voice heard. And lastly, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, hit a like, share the video around. It helps our numbers and it makes sure the algorithm doesn't punish us for not getting, well, more attention. But until next time, happy gaming, everybody.
Thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Discussions of Darkness. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and sharing it on your own social media to help boost the signal. And if you'd like to help us keep the show and channel going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. If you have any questions about the topic I covered today, or if you have something you'd like to see covered in a future episode, make sure to leave it in the comments below. Lastly, please check out the link in the video description to browse all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements from Ezekiel Games. So far, we've covered Changeling the Lost, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, and Geist the Sin Eaters, in addition to a handful of general supplements that will be useful for any game set in the World or Chronicles of Darkness settings. Thank you in advance for your support. You're the ones who help us keep the lights on, so we don't fade into the shadows.